Hello, lovers of romance. Today I have prepared for you a story called Do You Need Salvation? This is a story about love, fate, and incredible trials that the main characters will have to go through. Don't forget to support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel so as not to miss new interesting stories. Thank you for watching. This stately home with its red spires and graceful facade hides a dark secret. Its owner, hiding behind the external splendor, plots to destroy this world, considering it unworthy of existence. Her plans intertwine with the beauty of this place, creating a contrast between evil and splendor. The girl's hands carefully opened the heavy curtains, behind which the bright sun illuminated the room, filling it with warmth. Light rays touched the glass. In the middle of the room, a girl stood by the window in a black dress with white elements. Her hair was neatly arranged. She opened the curtains, and the whole room was filled with light. The interior looked luxurious, but there was a certain mystery in its atmosphere. The girl turned around and asked how her mistress was feeling. It was a servant of the Citus family, named Tina. She had brown hair, green eyes, and a small nose. She looked pretty, with a gentle smile and a soft, calm look. Her mistress was of indescribable beauty. Her ash-white hair, though disheveled from sleep, fell on her shoulders. Her hand shielded her face from the sun, and her white eyelashes gave the whole image a magical charm, as if she were created from light. The girl was lying on a bed, large and luxurious, like the room itself. Her very long hair with a small fringe fell onto the pillow. Her small hands seemed like a doll's, and she herself, against the backdrop of all this luxury, looked fragile, like an unearthly creature. She looked at the maid, and in her eyes there was a very deep and bright look, something that was unique to her, like some kind of inner light that distinguished her from the world around her. The maid came up to her mistress and stood by the bed, but she shook her head weakly and said that she felt sick, although she had not eaten anything yet. Her whole body ached and her chest burned. Tina immediately became worried. The lady did not look ill. On the contrary, her face was full of joy. But suddenly she said, "However, nothing new." At this moment one could think, how strange that the girl does not feel any worries, despite everything that is happening. The maid looked at her sadly, wishing her all the best. She felt sincerely sorry for her mistress, and deep concern was felt in her heart. The girl felt a heaviness in her heart. Her own problems worried her, but most of all she pitied people, because of her they suffered and worried. She did not like being the source of their pain. The girl forced a smile and said, "I'm fine." She didn't want to upset those around her, seeing how Tina was worried about her with all her heart, but something inside her resisted. The maid sighed heavily. Her gaze filled with worry, and she said, "This condition is not considered normal." Continuing to look at her mistress with sadness, the maid gently ran her hand over her mistress's cheek, looking closely into her eyes. She saw her suffering perfectly well, but she knew that the proud lady would never admit it out loud. She looked at the lady with her green eyes, admiring this girl. She was beautiful in everything, but still quietly said, "I will bring water for washing." The maid quietly headed for the exit, her light steps dissolving in the silence. The mistress watched her for a long time, feeling how the emptiness of the room became even heavier. She was left alone, surrounded by cold walls and unspoken words. As soon as Tina left the room, the girl was overcome with sadness. Grabbing a pillow, she pressed herself against it, plunging into anxious thoughts. The room, once full of warmth, now seemed empty and cold. In the silence, only her even breathing sounded, which seemed unable to drive away the darkness that had enveloped her heart. Tears welled up in the girl's eyes. She couldn't understand how this had happened. How she, the terminally ill daughter of the Citus family, had ended up in this situation. Her name was Miena Citus, and despite everything, she always considered herself a failure, not believing that she deserved better. The girl looked completely different. She didn't look sick. She was wearing a beautiful blue dress with an elegant black bow in the middle. Well, to put it briefly, Mina was reborn. It sounds strange, and she herself would probably agree with it. The girl was lying on a rocking chair with doctors fussing around her. She was bent over in pain, but no, she had not ended up in a different time. She had actually been reborn. The doctor leaned over the hospital bed where she lay limply, while her parents stood behind her, watching with alarm and horror. The doctor's face was tense and disappointed, as if he already knew the outcome was predetermined. His eyes were closed, and he was struggling to contain his emotions, trying not to show his fatigue. It seemed as if she had already died in her past life. The girl lay limply on a hospital bed in a dim ward. A doctor stood next to her, his head bowed, and behind her, on the floor, sat her parents, hugging each other and crying bitterly. The room was silent, broken only by their quiet whispers, and everything around seemed hopeless. The girl had died of her illness after all. Even modern medicine couldn't help our girl. Her mother, crying, grabbed the doctor's coat and literally screamed, "How could you do this?" The doctor was silent. "My girl was in so much pain, and you kept saying she was better." These were the words of her mother, and she was right. The girl was in unbearable pain. She cried literally every time there was no one left in the ward except her. She clenched her teeth in pain, trying to hold back the tears, but they still flowed like a river. Every movement brought a new wave of fear and despair. In her case, medicine was powerless, and all the hopes that once seemed real crumbled to dust. Neither blood tests nor CBT helped her, and even high-tech equipment proved powerless. All this did not help to find out what unknown illness had struck the little girl. Despite the fact that a large number of people tried to help them, the results still remained unchanged. They all turned out to be charlatans, and most of them just pulled money without giving a single real solution to the problem. And the rest talked complete nonsense, and this all led to disappointment. And the girl, to even greater sadness. One day, she was told, "Well, if you continue like this, you'll soon kick the bucket." To her great surprise, that's exactly what happened. Her health got worse day by day, and then at 20, she breathed her last. Now she is a little girl who has just seen the world with her rainbow eyes. She had short blonde hair, just like her eyelashes. The first thing she saw were her new parents, who she probably resembled. They spoke warm words to her, that she was their favorite girl and that her dad would do anything for her. The little girl felt safe and happy, surrounded by care. This world she found herself in seemed even more luxurious than the previous one, and the family she was born into was quite wealthy. It was unusual for her to feel life in new colors. Her life took on new colors. She had loving parents and literally everything she dreamed of. The servants also adored the little one, always trying to please. In this new world, she felt like a princess, surrounded by care and attention, and every day brought her joy and surprise. She became Siddis decided to leave the past behind, focusing on the present, enjoying every moment of her new life. But fate decided that her blue eyes should be filled with sadness again. Apparently, the long path of life was not intended for her. The girl was lying sick on the bed again, and her parents were sitting next to her, just as sad. She felt sorry for them again. Although she was still little, she already understood what a grief this was for them. They were told, "Unfortunately, Mrs. Mina is unlikely to survive the winter." At the age of 5, she was struck by illness again, as if it were destined to happen again. The disease raged in her small body again, and every breath was a struggle. Her parents looked at her with pain in their eyes, feeling what they loved so much slipping away. Her parents did not give up and did not spare money for the treatment of their little daughter. They regularly brought doctors, each time trying to find the best. Thanks to her parents' efforts, the girl lived another 7 years, which was quite a long time for her. But now she was overcome with anxious thoughts. What would happen next? She felt the unknown future slowly creeping up on her, and she could not understand what awaited her. She lay on her bed for days, staring at the ceiling, and thought about life. Or rather, she didn't think about it because the outcome was already predictable, and it was clear that there was no point in hoping for anything more. Mom and Dad called the best doctors from the capital and bought all the necessary medicines, hoping to improve her condition at least a little. At that time, the girl no longer hoped for anything. Her gaze showed only disappointment and awareness of the inevitable. Even a skilled magician healer came to her, but it was all in vain. She felt sorry for herself, but even more so for her family, who tried their best to help, not understanding that they were powerless to change her fate. While she was talking to herself, thinking about her life, a maid accidentally came in and heard what she was thinking about: her loneliness. She felt so sorry for the girl that she forgot about her duties for a moment, feeling the pain of her loneliness. The maid nevertheless entered the room and, looking sadly at the girl, asked her not to speak like that. She came closer. The little girl sighed and asked Tina for forgiveness, understanding how hard it was for her. The maid approached Miena and, with despair in her voice, said that no one would ever abandon her. The girl, without changing her position, continued to look at the ceiling, as if not hearing her words, absorbed in her thoughts. Her gaze was full of disappointment. She heard words of encouragement from the maid, but they brought no comfort. "Don't give up, mistress, everything will be fine." But for her, these words sounded empty, as if they could not change anything. She forced a smile and quietly said, "Thank you." But in her heart, she knew that Mina's death-situs would come as no surprise to anyone. It was inevitable, and despite her best efforts, she knew the end was near. Miena asked not to wake her up until lunch, saying that she wanted to sleep a little. Tina, reluctantly agreeing, nodded sadly, understanding that the girl needed time to rest, although it was hard to see her in such a state. As soon as Tina left the room, the girl immediately fell asleep, plunging into a deep, serene sleep, as if trying to escape from heavy thoughts. Her dreams would probably seem ordinary to other people, because dreams for everyone are usually full of miracles and magic, taking you to a world where everything is possible. But her dreams were different. There was something special in them, something that others could not see. Unknown and mysterious, like a reflection of her inner world. Hidden from, she often found herself in a large library in her dreams. Finding herself in the library this time, she decided to look through the newspapers. There were quite a lot of them, and she hoped to find something interesting among the pages that concealed stories and events. She looked at the different headlines of the newspapers and was amazed at what people could come up with. But one headline especially caught her attention: the long-awaited merger of Somnium and Linux. This event seemed strange and mysterious to her, and she could not resist the desire to find out more. She read the article attentively. Somnium was the empire she currently lived in, and Linux was a prosperous kingdom across the sea. The unification of two such powerful forces promised to be a momentous event, and she couldn't help but wonder what it would mean for her future. She woke up, and despite the weight of reality, she was pleased with her dream. It brought her at least a moment of peace, which she had so rarely managed to find in her life. Maybe it's time to go dream hunting, she thought, feeling her consciousness being consumed once again by the desire to find solace in the world of dreams. It may come as a surprise to some, but everyone dreams. It is an inevitable part of the night, and it contains both secrets and revelations that are only available in sleep. The place the girl was going to resembled a waiting room. Here she could move into other people's dreams, as if becoming part of their world, observing their thoughts and experiences. Such a journey allowed her to experience feelings and experiences that she had never known before. Let's call it a dream tour. She could enjoy life at sea, looking at the beautiful view, feeling the freedom and peace that was missing in her reality. And behind the glittering doors in the waiting room was something that could be very useful. The girl was puzzled by this, not knowing what exactly was hidden behind them and what role it would play in her journey. Usually, late in the morning at such a time, the doors do not appear. Or they were here all night. The girl thought, trying to understand what this mysterious moment hides. But the girl thought that she had not yet entered these doors. This place remained unknown to her, and her curiosity was increasingly aroused by the desire to find out what was hidden behind this mysterious threshold. She walked and came closer to the doors, feeling her heart speed up its rhythm. It seemed like there was something important hidden behind them, and now she was ready to find out what it was. There was an interesting detail on the door side, in the very middle, as if a built-in sign. It attracted attention. The girl wondered what it could mean. The sign seemed like an important clue, and her curiosity could not stop. The girl decided to enter and knocked on the door with her hand, quietly saying, "Sorry for the intrusion." The girl entered the room hesitantly, half squinting her eyes as if expecting something unexpected. Her steps were cautious, and every sound in the room seemed amplified, as if everything around her was watching her. Her eyes were closed and her face looked tense, as if she was preparing for something unexpected. Her expression was a mixture of anxiety and determination, as if she was on the verge of a major decision. She opened her eyes and was very surprised by what was happening. What she saw was completely unexpected, and her face reflected complete amazement. She didn't understand where she was. There was complete darkness all around, and it seemed that the darkness itself was thickening, swallowing everything around. The girl felt alone in this silent space, as if she had found herself in another world. The girl was horrified and began to panic. The blood inside her was boiling and her heart was beating wildly. She realized that she had to leave and quickly looked around, trying to find a way out of this dark emptiness. She noticed that there was no sign on the door anymore. Something was definitely wrong. The place became even more mysterious and disturbing, and the girl felt her fear intensify. The girl had already grabbed the handle and was preparing to open the door to leave, but suddenly she heard a voice. She stood, turning towards the door, when suddenly she heard the question, "Who is it?" The realization that she had indeed disturbed the peace made her freeze with fear. Her body shrank, and her heart sank in her chest. She turned around and began to look around, trying to figure out where the voice was coming from. There was a dead silence all around, and every step she took seemed to echo. The girl felt the tension growing, and her gaze quickly slid through the darkness, searching for at least some kind of answer. In the darkness, she seemed small, as if lost in this boundless world where everything around was swallowed by darkness. Her figure was lost in the darkness, and it seemed to her that she was disappearing, dissolving in this mysterious space. She was still holding the door handle tightly, perhaps so that she could quickly open it and run away if necessary. At that moment, she heard the voice again, quiet and alarming. But this time, when she heard the question, it was a boy who appeared from the darkness. His eyes were wary, and his expression was full of worry, as if he himself did not know what was happening in this dark place. "Who is there?" he asked again. The girl had already opened the door and, looking into the darkness, asked anxiously, "Is there anyone here?" Her voice sounded a little trembling, reflecting her growing anxiety. There was only silence inside, and Mia's gaze darted around in search of an answer. The boy asked again, "Who are you?" And the girl, hearing his quiet voice, smiled involuntarily. It was so soft and calm that for a moment she forgot about anxiety. Feeling a strange peace, she fiddled with her fingers, lost in thought. If they can talk, then this must be someone's dream, she thought. Questions began to fill her head, and she felt reality becoming more and more unclear. The more she thought about it, the stranger the situation seemed to her. She felt that it was all beyond her comprehension. Finally, she decided to apologize to the guy, feeling that her presence here might be unexpected and even disruptive, but she heard no answer. Perhaps it was because it was a dream without any concrete content, or perhaps because the door was nameless and hid its secret. She looked into the void again and, with a hint of despair, asked, "Can you hear me?" And this time she heard an answer. He said he hadn't seen her before. The girl thought about how thin and gentle his voice was. But here was the problem. She didn't know the name or the face of the speaker. She only heard his voice, which sounded as if from somewhere in the void. The girl wondered what she should do. Try to get out of this dream or continue the conversation with the boy to understand what was happening. Fear and curiosity were intertwined in her head at the same time, and the choice did not seem so simple. The girl asked cautiously, "Can I talk to you?" Her voice was shaking, but she was trying to hide her growing excitement. The question hung in the air, and she wanted to understand who or what was hiding behind that voice. She stood in the darkness, as small and alone as before. There was an oppressive emptiness around her, and even her own presence seemed insignificant in this vast gloom. She smiled, and trying to calm herself in the surrounding atmosphere, said, "I'm not scary at all," demonstrating that she was not to be feared. Her voice was soft, as if she was trying to convince not only him but herself that everything was under control. The boy stuttered, "Do you want to talk?" His voice was shaking, and you could hear how he himself felt the fear, as if his own words carried with them the weight of uncertainty and anxiety. The girl happily confirmed her words, trying to make her voice as confident as possible. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and despite her fear, she felt that this conversation could become something important for her. She asked if he would mind if she let some light into the darkness, because she couldn't stand the darkness. Her voice sounded a little tense, but there was a sense of hope in it, as if the light could dispel not only the darkness around her, but also her own fears. But the answer surprised her. It was negative. The guy said that it was not worth bringing light to this place. His words sounded quiet and uncertain. The girl agreed to just chat, hoping that at least that would help ease the tension, but he refused too. His reluctance to talk upset her, and for a moment her heart sank. She felt the darkness filling the space around her again. The girl turned around and said with a slight sigh, "Then I'll have to go back." Her voice was a little depressed, but she tried to hide her disappointment, deciding that if conversation was impossible, she wouldn't stay here. As soon as the girl wanted to open the door, she heard that he was forbidden to do so. His voice was low and a little wary, as if someone or something was holding him back from letting her go. She asked who forbade it and heard the answer, "Father." This answer surprised the girl very much because it was not logical at all. Thinking that this was absolute nonsense, she felt anger wash over her. It was too ridiculous to take seriously, but her irritation did not go away. The girl decided to ask the guy's name. Her curiosity won out, and she, trying to hide her growing anxiety, quietly said, "What's your name?" She heard the answer that he didn't know his name and was horrified. His words sounded so lifeless that a chill ran down her spine. Everything seemed even stranger and more incomprehensible than before. She felt she had to do something, and suddenly she noticed something. It made her worry. She was startled by the unexpectedness. Her heart began to beat faster and her breathing became ragged. What she saw was so sudden and unfamiliar that for a moment she lost the ability to think clearly. She began to slowly disappear, and this meant that she was about to wake up. A bitter disappointment appeared in her chest. Why now? Her desire to understand, to learn more, was cut off halfway, and this upset her. She started walking slowly towards the exit and, looking back, called the guy. Her voice was full of doubts whether she should do it or not. The guy wanted to answer something, but as soon as he opened his mouth, the girl interrupted him. She could not wait any longer, and feeling that time was running out, she hurried to take a step forward, not giving him a chance to finish. She finished by saying quickly that she would be back tomorrow at the same time and that he should wait for her. She said it loudly and quickly, giving herself almost no time to realize that her words could be her last in this strange place. The boy asked her again if she would come back when she was already standing in the doorway. His voice sounded with a note of uncertainty, as if he couldn't believe that she would actually go to that dark place again. The girl shouted loudly, "Yes," and turned to him. Her answer was full of determination. She did not know what awaited her. Already literally flying out of the dream world, she shouted even louder that she would return. Her words echoed through the void, and despite the fact that her body was already leaving this strange world, there was a firm confidence in her voice, as if she herself could not believe what she said. In reality, she looked anxious. Her face was covered in a fine sweat from the adventures she had experienced in her dream. Her body still retained traces of tension, and her mind tried to comprehend what had just happened, feeling the remnants of anxiety like a shadow that followed her even in her awakening. The bright sun made her open her eyes, and she found herself back in her room. Everything around her was familiar and real, but in her head there was still a trace of the strange dream, as if something important had not been completed. The girl woke up and saw the maid next to her. She was glad to see her, because Tina was always there, ready to help, and the girl appreciated it more than words could express. Tina leaned towards the girl and apologized for the possible noise, wondering if it had disturbed her sleep. Her voice was soft and caring as always, and this further reinforced the feeling of comfort and safety that the girl felt in her presence. Cydia's family is not particularly well known and is currently in ruins, so guests often come to our house, and perhaps someone has arrived now. The great advantage of our family is the ancient family name and rich history, but it is appropriate to discuss this only if a marriageable girl is growing up in the family. Then an ancient family name and rich history can play a role. The girl sat on the bed and thought, there can be no talk of matchmaking. The Cydia's family has only one daughter who is already counting down the days until her death. And yet, after a few minutes of reflection, she came to only one conclusion. The moneylender had come to the house again. This thought did not please her at all. A loan shark demands payment for debts that have accumulated over the years. This is very depressing, because the Cydia's family is already barely making ends meet. On the one hand, he is not doing anything illegal, but on the other hand, his attempts to profit from a sick girl and her unfortunate parents seem inhumane. The girl sat on the bed, looking thoughtfully ahead. Her fragile image was complemented by soft rays of light sliding through her hair. The maid standing next to her quietly said, "I'll be back soon." Tina looked beautiful. Her favorite hairstyle, neatly combed back hair, gave her sophistication. Her eyes sparkled as if reflecting inner joy, and the outfit perfectly emphasized her elegance and grace. Miena clutched the blanket in excitement and, unable to hide her anxiety, asked how long he had been here. In response, she heard that he had just arrived and the owner had come down to him about 15 minutes ago. After that, her blood began to boil with anger inside her, and her soul was filled with rage. She felt a storm of emotions engulfing her and decided that, first of all, she needed to understand the situation in order to understand what was happening and how to proceed. With a heavy voice, she told the maid that she needed to go out. Her words sounded determined, but there was an internal struggle behind them, as if she was trying to pull herself together before taking the next step. But the maid began to dissuade her because she had been ordered not to let the girl out of the room until the guest left. She spoke with anxiety in her voice, fearing that violating this order could lead to consequences. "You are really bad, mistress," said the maid. These words made the girl furious. She could not understand why she was only concerned about her well-being now. However, despite her anger, she knew that the maid was right to some extent. The situation was difficult, and she needed to think about how to proceed. Miena decided not to argue with Tina and agreed, lying back on the bed. She loved the maid for her kindness and care, which always brought comfort in the most difficult moments. The girl lay down and thought that she was no longer at the age to start objecting with whims as a form of protest. "And I will lie quietly," she decided, trying to calm down and leave all the worries for later. "Let's see if my body will listen to your rational arguments." And no, it didn't. I started coughing and choking terribly, asking Tina to bring me water. The internal protest was so strong that even the body couldn't ignore it, squeezing it out in a painful reaction. Tina's face immediately became frightened and gloomy. The maid was seriously afraid for her mistress. Her eyes darted around in panic, trying to figure out how to help. She rushed towards her, screaming her name, desperately hoping that everything would be okay. Tina hoped with all her heart that the situation would not get worse. But the little girl could not cough. Her chest was squeezed with panic, and every breath was difficult. The maid lifted Mina, thinking that perhaps she would feel better, but it did not help. The coughing did not subside, and each attempt to breathe became more and more difficult. Tina panicked, realizing that her efforts were not producing results, and her anxiety only increased. And so the girl asked the maid to quietly bring her some water. Tina sighed a little, realizing that her mistress needed help, but fearing that even this might not ease her condition. The girl's eyes were filled with tears, and she was having trouble catching her breath as she quietly asked for some cough medicine. Tina, seeing her suffering, quickly headed for the closet. Her heart constricted with worry, but she knew she had to act. Tina left the room, hurrying to bring everything she needed. Her steps sounded fast and decisive, but inside her confusion did not go away. She hoped that she would make it in time and would be able to somehow ease the suffering of her mistress. The girl was left alone in the room. After looking around, she decided that it was time to start her plan. A clear image of what needed to be done was already forming in her head, and now she only had to act, despite her weakness and pain. She got out of bed and started running out of the room, her heels literally sparkling with speed. At that moment, she didn't care how she felt. All her thoughts were focused on completing her plan as quickly as possible. She ran down the hallway, mentally apologizing to Tina. It was tiring for her to lie there all day, feeling powerless and helpless. She ran to the right door and was already a little angry, thinking that next time this would not work. Her patience was running out, and she felt that it was time to act more decisively, not allowing circumstances to control her life. She grabbed the door handle and squeezed it hard, opening it slightly. Mina didn't know if she was doing the right thing, but the girl couldn't lie on the bed either. Her gaze was calm, literally expressionless. She stood in the doorway, watching everything that was happening, as if every movement was part of a carefully thought-out plan, and she was waiting for the right moment to act. Dad was clearly frightened by this man. He was sitting on the floor, hunched over, and an evil demon towered over him, demanding money. Dad answered in a trembling voice that he needed just a little time, but his eyes showed panic and helplessness. The girl was struck by sadness, and she was already looking at what was happening with alarm. The man was shouting that they should not take money from him at all if they could not return even a small part of the amount. His words sounded like a sentence. The men argued among themselves, each trying to prove his case. The girl, watching this, thought, They started a fight. Her irritation grew, and she began to feel how everything around her was getting out of control. Miena heard a bit of compromise, albeit with a hint of doctor in the man's voice. It was becoming more and more interesting to watch as the moneylender asked if we could return at least some of the money. The anxiety was growing, and the question hung in the air, leaving no choice. They began to argue about the mine, which, as the father said, should bring a lot of income to the moneylender, but so far only brings losses. Dad threw up his hands, not knowing how to explain the situation and satisfy his demands. The girl decided to go into the room anyway, thinking that the moneylender was a fool, since that was why they had turned to him. Her irritation grew. The moneylender started demanding money again, and her father reminded him of her, because she was sick, and this was a big problem. The girl watched with sadness, realizing that she was guilty of something. Perhaps she shouldn't have come here, because everything was only getting worse. By chance, Mina coughed in alarm and thus attracted attention. All eyes immediately turned to her. Now 2 grown men who had just recently been arguing heatedly were looking at her, their eyes full of expectation, and Mina felt the pressure on her increase, making her even more nervous. Her father turned to her and she happily replied, "Good morning, Daddy." Thinking to herself, what a stupid body. Even in this situation, it created a big problem for her. The dad asked the girl what she was doing there, to which she looked at him innocently and replied that she was woken up by the noise. She tried to look convincing, although inside she felt awkward, realizing that her words were far from entirely true. The man stood behind her father, looking down at the little girl with disdain. He said quietly, "This little brat." His words were irritated, and even in his tone, you could hear how he underestimated her, which only added tension to the already heavy atmosphere. She looked at the moneylender, and she seemed too wonderful for his view. And yes, it was the same daughter whose presence could not go unnoticed, despite all the tension of the situation. The moneylender looked at the girl carefully, and she was surprised by his gaze, especially her white light eyelashes, the same as her hair. It contrasted with the rest of her appearance, giving her an unusual, almost ghostly beauty that seemed not to fit into this world. The girl greeted the moneylender and apologized for interfering in their conflict. The man was surprised by such an act from the little girl, because her calmness and politeness did not correspond at all to the tense atmosphere in which they were. The man took pity on the girl and decided that it was time to end it. After all, she was just a child and didn't need to hear their conflict. His gaze softened a little, although the tension in the room didn't go away. He informed them that since that was the case, that was all for today, and thus said goodbye to the family. His words sounded reserved but decisive. He said that she should thank him because he himself had a daughter of the same age. At these words, the girl felt irritation inside herself. His attempt to evoke gratitude was too obvious, and this added to her displeasure even more. Still, he decided to remind her that he would come again at the end of the month to get his money back. His words sounded like a threat, and the girl felt the weight of this upcoming visit pressing down on her again. When he reached the door, he began to threaten what would happen if he did not see the money. His voice sounded firm and threatening, and each word cut into the atmosphere, filling it with even more tension. Finally, he turned around and said that he would give them a hard time if they did not fulfill the conditions. His words sounded like a threat. The girl was happy that her acting had worked and he had left. She felt relieved, but immediately realized that this was only a temporary victory, and that there would still be difficulties ahead. The girl no longer looked so sad and made a quiet sound, reminding her father of herself. He turned to her and said that he was sorry that his daughter saw him so pathetic and worthless. These words made the girl upset, because she did not want her father to feel this way. She was sincerely sorry that her father was saying exactly those words. The girl felt guilty. Miena decided that if she could get rid of the crook this time, she could protect her home next time. A sense of confidence arose inside her, despite everything that was happening. She was ready to fight for her family and do everything for them. The girl looked at her father's back and quietly called him. She felt sorry that he blamed himself because, as she believed, only she was to blame. This feeling intensified her inner pain, but she wanted to support her father, to let him know that he was not alone in this struggle. The father turned around and his daughter's words broke his heart. She quietly said that it would have been better not to waste money on her, because all their efforts had failed and she still felt terrible. Her confession hit him harder than any words, making him feel pain inside. Mina herself looked calm, not at all worried. Her words sounded sincere because she had long ago resigned herself to the fact that the disease would remain with her forever. This confidence gave her appearance a strange calm, which only increased her father's pain. The girl came closer to her father. Her fragile figure seemed tiny next to him. Gathering her courage, she calmly said that there was no point in wasting money on her, because she would die anyway. Her words, spoken so simply, made her father freeze, as if from a heavy blow. Her parents did everything they could for her, and she was immensely grateful for it. Their care and efforts filled her heart with warmth, even despite her heavy thoughts and the inevitability of illness. Thanks to them, Mina lived such a long life, although by all expectations, she should have been in the grave long ago. Their love and care gave her every new day, despite the severity of the disease. The father looked at his little daughter in horror, not believing his ears. She, his precious girl, was saying such words, and it shook him to the depths of his soul. He realized that she had lost hope for life, and this feeling tore his heart apart. The girl saw her father's thoughts reflected in his eyes, and a small tear came out of her eyes. But despite this, she decided that she would not back down from her decision. Her voice was quiet, but full of inner pain. She was talking to her father, but her words were not only filled with hatred for the moneylender, but also with the realization of how their lives had changed because of this debt. The girl told her father that they had wasted such a large sum of money because it was not worth getting bogged down in debt. The father did not believe that she had said such words, and without restraining himself, he asked her again, trying to understand whether she really thought so. His face reflected anxiety and disappointment. The girl looked into his eyes with hope, her gaze full of confidence that she would be able to convince her father. "Face it," the girl said quietly. "After I leave this world, you—" She paused briefly, giving her words power. They stood in the middle of the room, silently looking at each other, and the air was filled with a tense silence, filled with unspeakable pain. "And the rest of this estate," the girl continued, "must live on." She finished her speech, and the room fell silent again. Her father's gaze, full of pain and doubt, met hers, and for a moment it seemed that neither of them could find the words to break the silence. Her father's gaze became unbearable and incomprehensible to her. Pain and anger raged in his eyes. He seemed torn between emotions he could not express in words and what was happening in their lives. The father angrily leaned towards the girl and shouted loudly, "Don't say that." He was in pain, and his words sounded like a cry from the soul. He could not accept the fact that his daughter, small and fragile, was ready to let go of life, and this was destroying him from the inside. The girl stood silently, watching her father's fists clench in anger. She was sad to see him suffer, but she didn't know how to comfort him. She forced a weak smile, although it was hard. She felt guilty towards her parents. The girl wanted to spend her last days without thinking about heavy worries, and feeling peace in her heart, she walked in the right direction. She turned to her father, confidently spoke her words as if freed from the burden. She didn't want to see her parents suffer because of her anymore. She came closer to her father and stood quietly in place. She couldn't be the cause of their suffering anymore, and she wanted her mom and dad's life to continue without her shadow. After all, her parents had done everything to ensure that the girl's life was happy and long, sacrificing their strength and hopes for her well-being. She knew how much they had given for her, and although her heart was full of pain, she decided that she would not be a source of suffering for them. Mina didn't want to be a burden in their relationship. She knew that her death would bring immeasurable pain to her parents, and the thought tore at her soul. But she also knew that she couldn't let them live in constant anxiety over her illness, and she wanted them to be able to find peace, even if it meant saying goodbye to her. The daughter took her father's hand, her fingers shaking slightly. She tried to find the words, but felt that words could not convey everything. Deciding to distract him, she changed the conversation to something harmless. She suggested that her father visit new places with her mother, see the sights and enjoy delicious food, trying to dispel his heavy thoughts. Although she knew it was only a temporary distraction, she wanted to give at least a little joy in these difficult days. The father winced at her words. It seemed as if she was going to leave them very soon. He could not hold back these thoughts and said them out loud, unable to hide his anxiety and fear of the inevitable. The girl, smiling, replied that she knew her body better than anyone. But deep down, she was sure that she would not survive the winter. These thoughts remained hidden. The girl felt the death she had once faced in her previous life creeping closer and closer. It was like a shadow, always there. And despite her smile, she knew the inevitable was just around the corner. She continued to hold her father's hand, feeling his warmth penetrate her heart. Inside, there was only silence and the knowledge that she had to prepare for their separation. The father looked at the girl with sadness, realizing that she was smart and aware of everything. He saw calm in her eyes, but also the deep pain that she was hiding. His heart sank at the thought that she was already prepared for something he could not accept. The father, with a bitter smile, said that she was a lovely child and that they were incredibly lucky to have her. His voice trembled because he knew how unfair it was that such a smart and kind girl should experience such difficult moments in her life. He said that it was hard for him to hear such words from his own daughter, and his voice trembled treacherously. The girl thought that this was not the first time. She had already gotten used to the idea of her inevitability. The father agreed with the girl, his voice full of loss and love. He said that he would do whatever she wanted, trying to somehow ease her suffering. He smiled and said that they would try to spend this time usefully, trying to make her last days as happy and joyful as possible. His words sounded determined to give her as many bright moments as possible, despite all the difficulties. "So, have you decided where you want to go first?" The father asked cheerfully, looking at his daughter. "I'll do whatever it takes to take you there." The girl thought for a moment and replied that she wanted to visit the abandoned Tal's mines, a place that attracted her with its mystery and history. Dad looked at the girl, a little surprised but still smiling. He hadn't expected such a choice, but her eyes showed determination, and he couldn't refuse her that. Once upon a time, there lived a merchant who dreamed of traveling the world and becoming a treasure hunter. He spent his days studying maps, listening to stories of sailors and merchants, dreaming of amazing finds and riches that awaited him beyond the horizon. It was his big dream, but he was forced to stay in his hometown, running the family business, as his father could no longer continue working. Thanks to his incredible abilities, this daredevil earned huge amounts of money in any craft he touched, be it trade, blacksmithing, or even art. But he was never able to forget his childhood dream, a room with gray walls and a wooden ceiling decorated with beautiful trim. In the center is a stylish bookcase, adding coziness and intellectual charm. The fair man thoughtfully pondered how Lauren Johnson could die without finding a worthy hiding place for his riches. And he decided to hide the treasure chest himself so that other adventurers could find it. The man was rummaging around the office, actively searching for something. Every movement he made was tense, and she couldn't figure out what he was hoping to find in the mess. The girl watched what was happening and thought that all that was left was to find a suitable place. The girl thought it would be a good idea to bury it where no one would think to look. She stood in the middle of the forest, elegant and graceful, as if nature itself merged with her image. After some thought, the girl finally came up with an idea. What about the lands that were in their family's possession? The man was still thinking outside the window, trying to find a solution to what he should do in this difficult situation. His thoughts were confused, and the surrounding silence only increased the feeling of uncertainty. And then, as if noticing something, he glanced out the window to check his guesses. A feeling of wariness instantly overcame him. The man thought about it and realized that the abandoned mines of Thales could be the solution, a place where people rarely go. He decided that it was the perfect choice for a hiding place, hidden from view. The silence and isolation of this place seemed to him the best protection for his treasure. It felt like even the sky was helping him realize his cherished dream. The light wind and clear sky seemed to support his decision, as if all the nature around blessed this step. The man felt that at that moment he was on the right path. The girl admired the place, her eyes shining with delight, but her parents looked a little worried. They asked if she wanted to visit some other place, less dangerous because abandoned mines could hide many surprises. The mines looked truly dangerous and shocking, with dark and dusty passages where every step could hide danger. The echoes of time, collapsed walls, and forgotten mechanisms gave the place an ominous atmosphere, causing concern among the parents. The wooden doors and posts were eerie, cracked and warped by time. They seemed so old that they could fall apart at the slightest touch, adding even more gloom to the atmosphere of the abandoned mine. The lake was almost completely drained, leaving only small puddles at the bottom. Its desolate appearance only added to the gloom of the surrounding landscape, and the low water level made the mines especially visible, like ancient traces left in the earth. The father was angry, seeing everything around, and asked again if the girl really wanted to stay here. The girl replied that she really liked it here, and that the views were truly amazing. But in reality, her thoughts were occupied with something completely different. She could smell the money that was hidden in the depths of the earth. She hugged her father's hand, feeling his warmth and care, but deep down, she was sure that her plan would come true very soon. Everything would go according to her scenario, and she would cope with what she had planned. The girl ran forward without stopping, despite her father's warnings. She felt her heart beating faster because she was so close to her goal. Dad, shouting from afar, tried to warn her of the danger. The girl stopped, looking around. There was gorgeous nature all around. Where to now? She thought, a little lost, but still determined to go on her journey. After a bit of thought, she finally figured it out and made a joyful sound of delight. Her eyes sparkled as she realized where she needed to go, and her confidence returned. The girl confidently said to herself, "You need to go where the source and the end of the world meet, where a new story is born. Everything in our world takes its beginning there." These words were like a revelation, and she felt that this is where her path, full of mysteries and possibilities, would begin. The merchant came up with the idea that water represents the beginning of a journey, symbolizing freedom and movement, while the earth, on the contrary, represents completion, stability, and peace. It is a metaphor for life. Every journey begins with a stream and ends on solid ground, connecting two worlds. The girl stopped. She needed to look for the spring where water and earth met, right at the entrance to the mine. This was the place she was looking for, the boundary where the life force of water met the hardness of the earth. Here, at the junction of these two elements, she felt that her search was complete, the girl thought, looking at the water stream that merged with the ground. The merchant was really cunning, because not everyone would have guessed about such a place. Now all that was left was to find the spring itself, the point where the water hides secrets long forgotten by most. The girl looked at her father with a warm gaze and slightly shyly said, "Dad, I have a favor to ask." He immediately answered without thinking, "I am ready to do anything for you. Just tell me what you need." The girl asked again if he was sure he was ready to fulfill her request, to which her father, smiling, confirmed. The maid, standing nearby, also added warmly, "Of course, gentlemen, do not hesitate to speak." The girl, with a serious expression on her face, asked her dad to come to that stream and check if there was anything interesting. She watched his reaction carefully, expecting him to fulfill her request, although she already had her suspicions. The father, a little surprised by the unusual request, asked again, "Me?" He could not understand what exactly she was looking for in this small stream, but seeing her determination, he decided to listen and fulfill her request, albeit with a little bewilderment. He stepped carefully into the water, its coolness pleasantly enveloping his leg. The water was crystal clear, the blue shades shimmering like precious stones in the sunlight. The father continued walking along the stream, not quite understanding. The girl stood on the bank, watching her father's every step with a sinking heart. She believed that if he found something important in this stream, it would be her chance. She would try to survive for them. The father felt his daughter's gaze and continued walking despite his doubts. He didn't want to disappoint her, knowing how much she believed in this place. He looked attentively at the girl who was watching the whole process, and there was hope in her eyes. Dad continued to examine the water, and the girl quietly looked at him, thinking. She understood that if her time came, she would accept it. Let everything remain as it is, without regrets, but with the hope that at least this moment would bring peace to her family. The girl listened attentively to her father, who said with a serious face, "No matter what happens to our family, I will not go back on my words. I promise to save you and will do everything in my power." The father looked at the girl and smiled softly. "That's why I would be glad if you didn't give up and continued to fight." The father lowered his hands into the water, carefully examining the bottom, but looking up at the girl said, "There's nothing here." But suddenly the man froze, looking into the water, his face reflecting surprise as if he noticed something unusual. The maid noticed the surprise on the man's face and asked cautiously, "Have you found something, master?" The girl smiled happily, realizing that she had managed to solve the riddle. No one would have guessed that there was a treasure hidden in this inconspicuous stream, but perhaps it is high time to understand that you can't judge by the cover. After all, behind the simple appearance, there can be real value. The father lifted the chest with difficulty and carefully placed it on the grass. Its surface was covered with small scratches, but it still shone. The red color and yellow details, apparently gold, gave it a special shine. The father opened the chest in surprise and his eyes lit up. Inside, under the hard wood, was a treasure. The glitter of the jewels blinded him. The girl watched with a smile as her father and the maid discussed the find. Her heart was filled with joy and tenderness because despite all the difficulties, she was able to achieve her goal. It was a moment she would remember forever. The father, leaning over the chest, looked at his daughter in surprise, and she explained with a smile that she actually had an unusual ability. She could smell money like no one else. The girl, a little embarrassed, confessed to her father that she did not want to look for the treasure because of her health. However, after learning that they were in debt because of her, Mina changed her mind. She decided to do everything in her power to help the family and change their fate. Her father turned to her with a gentle but wary gaze, and Mina paused. He probably wanted to ask why she hid her gift, but there were reasons for that. The girl folded her hands and, feeling heavy in her soul, decided to ask her father for forgiveness. She sincerely regretted her actions. She was ashamed because she had big problems in her family. Her father came closer to her, but she didn't let him say anything, saying that she would now return all the money they spent on her. Her eyes shone with determination, but in her soul she felt a heaviness. The girl told them that the chest did not feel heavy because of a lightness spell that had been cast on it. This explained why even such valuable treasures could be carried so easily. The maid and her father were surprised by Mia's knowledge. She insisted that no one accompany them, being confident that they would be able to find him themselves. The coachman would hardly suspect anything amiss. The father wanted to say something, but the girl interrupted him, resolutely laying out her plans for the mine. Her eyes were shining with determination, and her heart was filled with hope for a better future for the whole family. The father interrupted the girl, finishing her words. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder, hoping to get her attention and let her know that it was his turn to speak. The girl and her father stood in the clearing, their eyes meeting. There was a stillness in the air, as if nature itself was holding its breath, waiting for the big moment. And Miena spoke, breaking the silence. The father looked at his daughter, his gaze full of concern and thought. He considered every word, trying to find the exact moment when he needed to say what she needed to hear. She expected him to say something important, something that could change her mind or give answers to questions that had been tormenting her for a long time. But instead of words, silence continued to hang in the air, as if the whole world was waiting for the next thing to happen. The maid stood nearby, her gaze fixed on them, and she too stood frozen in anticipation. You could read the tension in her eyes because she knew how important this moment was for everyone, and how his words could change everything. The man carefully lifted the chest, feeling its lightness despite its apparent heaviness. He said slowly that he had already thought. He took the chest with both hands and said that it would be better to put the money aside for her treatment. The girl, feeling uneasy, immediately tried to dissuade him. She did not want their funds to go only to treatment because she believed that other ways could be found to cope with the situation. The man began to explain to the girl that for her recovery, she needed potions and medicines that would help her live. But she knew that part of the treasure could cover their debts. However, the girl believed that this was much more important than her own health, and so the girl found herself in her dream again, surrounded by books. In this place where silence and mystery intertwined, she felt that each volume concealed important knowledge. Mia held the book in her hands, her fingers sliding over the parchment, but her thoughts were far from the text. The day had been long and hard. Every moment seemed unbearable. She was tired, but in the silence of the night, she found solace in reading. Trying to forget her worries and find some peace, she barely managed to persuade her father not to spend money on her treatment. But despite her fatigue, she felt she had to do it for the sake of their future. The girl looked tiredly at the wonderful world of dreams, absorbed in thoughts of what she had to do. Despite the beauty and tranquility around her, she knew that her real business was still waiting. With her small hands, she took a piece of paper and carefully folded it, turning it into an airplane. Then, with a slight smile, she launched him into the air, watching him float in her world of dreams and fantasies. And suddenly he was gone. The girl gasped in surprise because this shouldn't have happened. The little plane flew straight there, as if following an invisible trajectory. Confidently and without slowing down, the girl stood in front of the shining door again, but now there was no sign on it. She wondered what that could mean. Perhaps she should go there again. She began to recall the moments of her previous visit to this store, how step by step she discovered new mysteries and strange phenomena. Every moment was full of anticipation, and although this time everything looked different, the inner feeling that she had to enter did not disappear. The girl decided to collect her thoughts and solve problems as they arose, but she felt herself becoming irritable. The girl took a deep breath and, despite her inner doubts, decided to enter. She felt her heart beating faster, but step by step, with every movement, her doubts began to recede. She was ready to meet what was waiting behind this mysterious door. The girl stood in front of the door, struggling between the desire to end the suffering and the determination to complete her mission. She could not leave, knowing that she might leave a child who needed her help. The girl entered through the door, quietly apologizing to the resident, and continued on her way, overcoming doubts and fears about what awaited her ahead, deciding that she needed to go to the end, despite all the obstacles. She saw the boy and said hello, to which he nodded and said hello in response. They both exchanged glances, and despite the silence, there was a warm, almost invisible connection in the air, as if they both understood each other without words. The girl, with joy in her eyes, suggested to the boy that they quietly find out everything and talk today, confident that their conversation would help find a solution. She felt that the moment had come when openness and honesty would become important steps forward. The boy stuttered that he was not allowed to talk to anyone. The girl thought about it with a slightly irritated look, and firmly told him not to listen to anyone. She believed that he had the right to his own opinion and decision, and was ready to help him overcome this fear. Mina looked at him silently, and then, narrowing her eyes slightly, said, "You've already broken the rule because you talked to me." She didn't continue, leaving the words hanging in the air, giving him time to realize that perhaps the rules weren't always as cruel as they seemed. Mina thought about it, knowing how important it was for children to interact with others to develop social skills. She found it odd that his father had forbidden him to do so. She looked at the boy and said softly, "If you don't tell anyone, no one will know." She thought that the boy might seem careless, but in reality he was quite cautious. There was a caution in his eyes that meant he would not take risks. Mina felt that he just needed a little confidence to make the first move. The girl thought that he was so brainwashed that he could not feel free even in his own dreams. She felt sorry for the boy, understanding how hard it was for him to get rid of these fears and doubts imposed on him. But she was determined to help him find his way to freedom. There was hope in the girl's eyes that the boy would believe her and decide to talk. He asked again if no one would know for sure. Mina nodded softly, assuring him that if he kept the secret, no one would know. Her words were full of sincerity and care because she wanted to help him feel free. There was hope in the girl's eyes that the boy would believe her and decide to talk. He asked again if no one would know for sure. Mina nodded softly, assuring him that if he kept the secret, no one would know. Her words were full of sincerity and care because she wanted to help him feel free. The girl happily said that if he didn't blab, everything would be fine. But the boy interrupted her, assuring her that he would never tell anyone their little secret. Miena liked the boy's attitude and praised him, noting how important it is to be able to keep your word and maintain trust. The boy's voice became a little more cheerful, which pleased Mina. She put her hands on her hips, nodded, and, smiling, said, "So since we now have a common secret, let's switch to you." The boy was a little worried. He didn't understand what exactly was meant by on the first name basis. After some time of thinking, he decided to ask the girl, "What do you mean on the first name basis?" Miena explained that friends use the informal you. However, the boy still did not understand what she was talking about. Then she gave an example. Instead of hello, they would say, "Hi." The boy was surprised. He did not even imagine that it was possible to talk to someone in this way. The girl answered irritably, "Why not?" She was still surprised by his behavior, because for her, such thoughts were completely normal and did not cause any doubts. Mina, even more. The guy asked what a friend was. This question shocked the girl, and she froze for a moment, as if speechless, her gaze frozen, reflecting genuine surprise and confusion. Mina thought more deeply about how deprived the boy was of normal companionship. Her heart ached with sympathy. She knew he had probably never been shown what friendship was, and it made her feel a mixture of sadness and outrage. She wanted to help him understand what it was like to be with others. This boy was the master of a dream world so dark that it seemed he would melt at the first ray of light. His fragile voice was like a crystal vase. Just one awkward touch is enough for it to shatter into hundreds of tiny pieces. The girl wondered what this boy's life might be like in reality. It was hard for her to imagine what he was going through, and the thought made her feel unbearably sad. She felt deep pity for him and a desire to help him somehow. The girl sat down next to the boy, looked him in the eye, and began to explain. A friend is a person you can meet at any time without any reason. You can chat with him about everything in the world, share joys, and just have fun. Miena continued warmly. A friend is someone with whom you discover new things, share moments of joy, and enjoy delicious food. They are the person with whom even the simplest things become special. The boy, peeking out from behind the door, admitted that he found it a little difficult to understand such words. Miena, smiling, said that it only seemed difficult. In time, he would understand everything and realize what it meant to have a true friend. The girl said happily, with sparkles in her eyes, that friendship is not complicated at all and that there is no reason to consider it difficult. She extended her hand and added that she is ready to become his friend, to experience joys and difficulties together, supporting each other in any situation. The girl looked at him and folded her hands and asked what the boy's name was, but he replied that he didn't know his name. She got a little angry and thought that she would look for this man and punish him for what he did to this little boy. She asked him if he wanted a name. He agreed, and after some thought, she came up with a name for him. It was unusual. The full form was Ruminite, and to his friends, Ruth. The boy stood pressed against the wall, his white sleeveless shirt and blue shorts slightly crumpled, and his gaze was intense, as if he was expecting something important. The boy put his clenched hand to his lips, thinking about his new name, and quietly said it, as if checking how it sounded on his lips. The girl looked at him sweetly, noticing that he was happy with the name and that he didn't mind. There was a warm determination in her eyes. While she was still alive, she needed to pass on to the boy everything she knew about the world he found himself in. She decided to tell him how everything worked. She happily introduced herself to him, stating her name and family, and little sparks lit up in her eyes, reflecting her inner light and hope. The girl thoughtfully twisted the paper in her hands, creating another airplane. She looked at the boy and decided that it was worth learning a little about him. Perhaps he had knowledge that could be useful. Quietly asking him, she waited for an answer, hoping for frankness. She asked him several questions, but he did not know any of the answers. The girl was surprised again and, unable to restrain herself, exclaimed, "This is already some kind of nightmare." She could not understand how one could be so ignorant of such simple things. But despite all the surprise, Miena knew she had to focus on her main target, Patrick Johnson. She clutched the airplane tightly in her hands and, taking a deep breath, launched it into the air. The little plane rose into the air with a piercing sound and, taking the right course, flew far away, crashing right into the small brown doors. This was the world that Miena needed to find, the world that would open the way to solving her problems. Miena took hold of the handle, thought for a moment, and decisively opened the door. There was something new behind it, a small adventure that she was ready to meet with an open heart, not knowing what exactly awaited her beyond that threshold. As soon as Miena opened the door, her ears were filled with a loud shout from a man who demanded that beer and meat be brought to him. Suddenly, her eyes widened in surprise and she froze in place, shocked by the sight that appeared before her. It was unexpected, which even scared her a little. The man was sitting at the bar, shouting and waving a glass, and the frightened bartender didn't know what to do. The bar was wooden with dark walls. The girl, confused, stood in the doorway, not understanding what was happening, and felt strange in this hectic place. The man raised his hand and pointed one finger at the bartender. His gestures were both graceful and crude, as if he were trying to project power but had lost all sophistication in his demeanor. The bartender stood motionless, feeling the weight of the situation. The man, with eyes that seemed to be on fire, shouted that the bartender was a complete slacker. His voice was full of rage, and every word he said sounded like a reproach, making the bartender feel even more insecure and helpless. The man suddenly found himself on the floor, and in front of him stood an even less powerful man, his father. He was furious to see his son drunk. His face was distorted with anger. The father said that he should not have lived like that, and that he would look down on him from heaven, but not on his drinking mug. The father clutched his head pitifully, and the son began to apologize. In response, the father said that he probably decided to spend all the money he had earned. The atmosphere in the room was heavy, as if every breath was difficult. Tension hung in the air, and neither man knew what would happen next. The girl thought she had hit the nail on the head. The man turned to his son, saying that he had seen his will, but was still sitting there with his hands folded. So the world would never see his masterpiece. The boy continued to sit on his knees in front of his father, not knowing what to say. In his will, Lauren indicated that his treasure map could be used by absolutely anyone. So there are probably already those who are actively trying to solve the puzzle and find what is hidden from the eyes of many. But not everyone will be able to pass the tests because they require not only intelligence but also courage. The son tried to make excuses, with difficulty pronouncing the words. Well, leaving the family legacy to others is somehow... Trying to justify his reluctance to make a decision, but there was uncertainty in his voice. The father was furious at his answer and shouted loudly, "If you want the treasure to be yours, then solve the puzzle and take it already. Finally!" His words sounded like thunder, breaking the silence, and the tension in the air became almost palpable. The son, holding back tears, stood before his father, his eyes full of fear and uncertainty. The father, seeing his weakness, sighed. His anger subsided somewhat, and he decided to help. He said softly, "I will help you with the riddle. Listen and remember carefully." After these words, the son could not contain his joy. His eyes shone as if the world was filled with light. He raised his head and a wide smile appeared on his face. All fears and doubts disappeared when he realized that his father was really ready to help him. The son, still with a spark of hope in his eyes, thought about it. He decided to try a trick because if his father had already taken pity and agreed to help, perhaps he could find a quicker way to solve the riddle. With a smile, he turned to his father, offering his plan. He asked his father, smiling, if he was really willing to help, why not just show him where the treasure chest was? After all, in his opinion, it would be much easier than solving all these difficult riddles. The father was not happy with this idea from his son. The father approached his son with heavy steps, each step sounding like a warning. The atmosphere in the room was tense, as if the air had become thick and viscous. He was wearing patent leather shoes that squeaked on the floor, adding to the heaviness of the moment. The father looked into his son's eyes. His gaze was stern and penetrating. He asked, "Do you think it's that simple?" The son was a little confused. His confidence began to melt, and a slight worry appeared on his face. The White House with its wooden black inserts looked magnificent, contrasting with the bright blue sky. However, inside this house, there was an unimaginable commotion and screams that broke the silence, giving everything that was happening a gloomy and alarming feeling. Miena was shocked by the story. Everything in this house, from its white walls with black inserts to the blue sky outside the window, seemed so peaceful. But these screams... It did not correspond at all to her ideas about the relationship between father and son, which should be full of peace and comfort. She couldn't understand how the son of such a smart man could be so stupid. They gave him all the knowledge, explained everything, but he still couldn't understand the simplest things. This called into question not only his mental abilities, but also his ability to make independent decisions. Lying on the floor of the library, the girl thought about how the treasure would languish for centuries at the bottom of the stream, and Lauren would never be able to find peace. All these years of searching, fear, and futile efforts led him to nothing. She sympathized with the man. He had a difficult case with his son. The girl tensed and clenched her teeth, trying to remember what had happened in the other dream. Each memory slipped away like sand between her fingers, but she felt that somewhere there was a clue, some important moment that could explain everything, and she remembered. She had dreamed that the treasure map had passed to the only son of the Johnson family. It was like an epiphany. Perhaps he, despite his naivety, was the one who could find the treasure and finish what his father had started. She was still lying on the library floor, trying to put the puzzle together. Her long hair stretched out around her, forming a soft wave on the floor. She couldn't help but think that maybe the key to the solution was somewhere nearby, in this strange dream. And one question was bothering her. Why wasn't she waking up? The majestic palace in milky tones resembles a fairy tale castle. Graceful turrets, carved balconies, and arched windows create a feeling of lightness. The facade shimmers in the sun, and a blooming garden with fountains spreads around, emphasizing its magical atmosphere. The girl sleepily opened her eyes. Her snow-white hair and long eyelashes gave her an unusual twist, and her soft blue eyes harmoniously completed this image, creating a feeling of lightness and fabulous beauty. The maid Tina was leaning over the girl. Her green eyes were filled with tears, and her face was frozen in an expression of deep emotion, as if she had just experienced something terrible and still could not come to her senses. Tina carefully placed her hand on the mistress's bed, as if she was afraid to disturb her peace, and quietly addressed her, her voice trembling with excitement. Mia slowly turned her head in her direction, smiled tenderly, and said that she was glad to see her. Her voice sounded warm, as if her light blue eyes were shining with happiness. The girl noticed her daddy at the door, and her face instantly lit up with joy. She greeted him warmly, but quickly noticed that his gaze was downcast and his face was sad. This confused her, and a shadow of worry flashed in his blue eyes. Had she been overtired yesterday? She spent a long time gathering her thoughts, turning over the words in her head, but she couldn't find the right ones. She looked at him tenderly. Finally, she quietly said one word. "Father." But before she could say anything else, he abruptly interrupted her. The father immediately smiled, and a warm and sincere smile appeared on his face. He came closer, and in his eyes one could see deep interest and care for his daughter. Despite his sadness, he showed love and attention, trying to support her at this moment. She thought, if it was already getting light outside, it meant that she hadn't slept very long, and the night had flown by faster than she thought. The girl began to share her plans regarding the treasure she had found. First of all, she said, the gold had to be exchanged for money, and then the access of outsiders to the Tales mines had to be closed in order to keep the find safe. She continued to tell the story and came to the conclusion that even if people got inside, they would not find treasure. However, if access to the mines was limited, they would be tempted to buy the land entirely. She literally enjoyed her thoughts about what was to come. Her imagination painted pictures of herself watching the trade, smelling the sweet aroma of gold turning into money, and feeling the pride of realizing her success. Her father took her hand gently in his, bringing her out of her thoughts. His voice was warm and calm as he spoke to her, as if to remind her that reality was more important than her dreams right now. Her father asked her to look at him, gently reproaching her that she was ill and should not strain herself so much every time. His voice was full of concern. He leaned closer, looking carefully into her eyes, as if he wanted to make sure she heard him. The girl was extremely surprised to hear from her father that she should give up on the gold prospecting business. Her eyes widened in surprise, and questions swarmed in her head. She did not understand him. After all, she had slept only a few hours, and he was already ready to give up the treasure because of her imaginary fatigue. The girl tried to dissuade her father, convincing him that long trips are hard for everyone and that it is quite normal. However, he only sat silently next to her, and tears welled up in his eyes, reflecting his deep feelings. Mia smiled. Her eyes lit up, and she said that yesterday had been a really great day. She tried to ease the tension, hoping that such words would calm him down a little. Her father looked at her with a slight smile, but there was concern in his eyes. He knew that her optimism and attempts to comfort him would not be able to change what was really there. But still, he couldn't help but smile, looking at his daughter, who always found the strength to be a light even in the darkest moments. The father knelt down in front of his daughter, his gaze soft and caring. He gently stroked her head, as if trying to convey all his love and protection to her. His voice was quiet and warm. He said quietly that, despite his willingness to let her go with a smile, he would fight to the end to keep his beloved daughter alive. His eyes were filled with tenderness and determination, and despite the firmness of his words, there was a love in them that he could not hide. The girl was saddened by these words, but he added that she should take care of herself and enjoy life to the fullest before leaving. His words sounded like a farewell, and despite all the heaviness, there was care in them and a desire for her to experience all the best this world has to offer. The girl had different thoughts after the conversation with her father. They were clouded like her gaze, and her soul was empty. She hoped that her mother would return soon, so that there would be a feeling of security and comfort again, which she lacked so much. Mina sat in silence as she read the letter from her mother. It said that she was visiting the Duke and Duchess and would return home when their son was well. Her mother assured her not to worry, that she was fine. But despite these words, she felt uneasy and thoughts of her mother were constantly on her mind. Mina sat in silence as she read the letter from her mother. It said that she was visiting the Duke and Duchess and would return home when their son was well. Her mother assured her not to worry, that she was fine. But despite these words, Mina felt uneasy and thoughts of her mother never left her. She thought that she wished the boy would get well soon because only then would she be able to see her mother. All day, she could not concentrate on her studies. All her thoughts were about him. She knew that his illness was delaying her meeting with her mother, and this was the most important thing for her. Every minute dragged on like an eternity, but she continued to believe that everything would change. The plane flew smoothly and for quite a distance, describing a smooth trajectory in the air. Its wings fluttered gently in the wind, and it moved confidently forward, as if it knew that success awaited it. The whole path seemed flawless, and its flight was pleasant to watch. The girl made the airplane again and launched it. She always knew that it would show her the right place from which her night adventures would begin. Every time the airplane took off, her heart filled with excitement. She was sure that this place was the key to something important, to something that would change her life. The girl was surprised and looked at the door with confusion. It was the door to her mother's dreams, and there was some small inscription written on it that she could barely make out. Her heart began to beat faster, and many questions arose in her head. Why this particular door? There was an inscription on the door. It was a name, Justin Everdeen. The girl froze, looking at these words in surprise. She had never heard this name before, and a lot of questions immediately arose in her head. Who is this Justin? Why is his name on this door? The girl wondered if this was the boy her mother had written about on the sheet of paper. She remembered the letter mentioning some unknown person whose name she couldn't immediately remember. But now, standing in front of the door, she felt that it all mattered. Maybe this boy was the key to the mystery of the disease. She took hold of the door handle and paused, thinking, should she go in there? What awaited her behind that door? The door looked majestic. White, with exquisite yellow decorative elements that resembled gold. It was decorated with delicate patterns, radiating grandeur and solemnity, like a barrier between two worlds. The light that fell on its surface gave the doors an even more mysterious and majestic look. Mina wondered if she should go in, but she made up her mind. Something inside her told her that she needed to take that step to understand everything that door held. She was ready to face whatever was waiting for her, even if it was something unexpected and scary. Before her was a small hall, lit by the soft light of an antique candelabra. 3 candles burned on it, their flames swaying lazily, as if obeying the invisible breath of the room. Drops of crystal pendants sparkled in the light, creating patterns on the walls, as if reflecting the invisible magic that hung in the air. Mina looked around. There were majestic bookcases along the walls, and shelves with figurines on the side, among which stood out a coat of arms that radiated nobility. The room was filled with soft light, filling it with warmth and silence. It was as if this place breathed history, waiting for her to take the next step. The girl looked around cautiously, her gaze wandering around the room. She thought it might be an office. The interior was quite strict, with elements of antiquity, but at the same time luxurious. Every object in the room, from the massive shelves to the coat of arms, seemed imbued with meaning and history, creating a huge, impressive. Mina looked around the room. She suddenly noticed a leg coming from around the corner. It was wearing patent leather shoes, which gleamed in the soft light of the chandelier, giving the image a severe look. The leg was thin, and the shoe size was small, as if it belonged to a young man. And yes, it was a guy. His dark hair hung loosely over his face, giving him a casual but surprisingly handsome appearance. However, he looked tired. His shoulders were slumped, as if under the weight of an unbearable burden, and his gaze, although thoughtful, seemed dull. His whole appearance suggested that he was going through something difficult. The girl was able to see him completely. The black shirt gave him severity, and his soft blue eyes harmoniously combined with his black hair, creating an expressive contrast. The guy appeared before her in all his glory and, looking at her with contempt, said, "Who are you?" The girl first noticed the color of his hair. It was coal black, as if it had absorbed the darkness of the night. This shade looked unusual and mesmerizing, immediately captivating the eye. She then looked at his face and noticed silver gray eyes that reflected fatigue. Despite this, he was incredibly handsome. His features were harmonious, every movement and expression emphasized natural elegance, the girl thought. As soon as she looked at him, she realized one very strange but important thing that could influence her future. There was something in his eyes that attracted her attention, and this feeling seemed familiar, as if fate had once crossed their paths. She became wary, her gaze filled with worry. Suddenly, she understood. She and this boy seemed to be birds of a feather. They looked alike, especially their eyes and the fatigue that could not be hidden. This disease had struck them both, and now she clearly felt a connection between them, something unknown but inevitable. And yet she had to answer his question. She decided to transform into a maid, no matter how strange it might sound. She had often found herself in dreams where she had to play other people's roles, and this was nothing new for her. Smiling, she easily accepted this image and, looking at the guy, called him to dinner. But he was not a gullible man. He put his finger to his chin and thought for a moment, then quietly said that it was all strange. His voice was low and cautious, as if he already sensed that there was more to it than meets the eye. He looked at her irritably and said that he didn't understand why the maid had suddenly appeared and that he needed to eat. The girl was irritated by his conclusions. She hoped that he would stop being so suspicious. Apparently, the guy often had lucid dreams, but even for that, there were too many details. So he was the same as her. The guy, already with firmness in his voice and slightly covering his gaze, asked again who she was. He did not trust the so-called maid, her mysterious behavior and strange presence in the house. The girl didn't know what to do, but since she had to, she decided to transform into another girl right before his eyes. She became truly beautiful, an angel, the perfect choice to surprise him and maybe confuse him a little. She quietly addressed him so that he would not be afraid of her, because her intentions were far from evil, despite her strange appearance. The guy doubted again, because everything that was happening seemed too strange, and the transformation into an angel was something unreal that went beyond his understanding. The girl began to get tired of trying to convince him. Her patience was running out. Each of his doubtful looks, each word of uncertainty irritated her. She sat down at the table and calmly said that his mother's prayers had reached heaven and that she had already gone to him. The words sounded so confident that the guy froze for a moment, not knowing what to answer. The angel gently invited him to sit down at the table. Her gaze was full of silence and goodwill, as if in the girl's presence all worries should go away. The boy looked at her angrily, gritting his teeth in anger. The girl, sensing his irritation, repeated the legend about his mother's prayers again, trying to convince him. The room where the table stood resembled a greenhouse. Panoramic windows let in light, creating an atmosphere like a green garden filled with air and life. He sat down slowly on the chair, causing his shirt to wrinkle slightly. The guy still sat down on the chair and moved a little closer. His mistrust remained, but something in the environment and her words made him relax his guard a little. The boy began to insist and assure that she could not possibly be God's messenger, and demanded that she present evidence. The girl, thinking that he was probably an atheist, nevertheless decided to try to convince him. The girl in the role of an angel looked at him with a soft, warm gaze and asked, "Does anything hurt?" Her voice was full of concern, and she hoped that at least this question would help relieve his tension. The boy answered thoughtfully that he mostly had headaches, but lately he had been suffering from a fever. His voice sounded tired, as if this pain was a constant companion that he had not known what to do with for a long time. He began to tell about his symptoms, and the girl, having listened attentively, listed them all. He was surprised and asked if it was fatal. But she, without rushing to answer, asked, "What is your daily routine?" He asked incredulously, "Even if you are all-seeing, you must know at least something about your ward?" There was irony in his voice. He still doubted that she was really an angel, but he hoped that her words would help him find an answer to his questions. She advised him to turn to God with this question. The boy was a little angry at the girl's answer. His face turned pale with irritation, and he clenched his fists, not hiding his displeasure. He paused, his mouth slightly open as if trying to take it all in. A deep frown appeared on his face, and he looked as if he was lost in his thoughts, but he began to talk about his day anyway. I always feel bad when I wake up, he admitted with a sigh. I often skip breakfast because of it. I just can't bring myself to eat. There was a weariness in his voice, as if this routine had been a part of his life for too long. He continued to talk about his day, but the girl was surprised and, interrupting him, asked, "Do you do anything else besides this?" She looked at him carefully, trying to understand if he was hiding any other important moments from his life. The boy said that he also had lunch and dinner because, according to him, he was obliged to be at meals. The girl was surprised and asked, "Do you even rest?" It is strange for a teenager to follow a regimen so strictly without rest. Her gaze was full of concern. She began to understand that his daily routine may not be as healthy as he would like. As night falls, he heads to his room to lie down in a soft bed, covered with a warm blanket. The fatigue of a long day begins to be felt in his body, and he hopes every time that the night will bring the long-awaited rest. In his dream, he was reading books in a small, luxurious library. The furniture was antique and elegant, and the shelves filled with books created an atmosphere of privacy and silence. Soft light came through the large windows, reflecting the golden elements on the book covers. He was immersed in a world of words, enjoying the peace of this place where time seemed to not exist. The angel leaned forward on the table, his gaze serious, and she said quietly, "I think I know what's causing your illness." There was a note of sympathy in her voice, as if she had long ago figured out what was causing his ailment, but was only prepared to reveal it when he was ready to listen. It was hard to tell what she was feeling from the girl's expression, but she seemed strangely happy, as if she was hiding a secret or enjoying the moment. Her eyes were shining and a smile was barely noticeable on her lips, creating the feeling that she definitely knew something important that was yet to be revealed. The boy looked at her questioningly, his gaze full of bewilderment and expectation. He didn't know what to think because her behavior seemed increasingly strange to him. Many questions were spinning in his head, but he decided to remain silent, hoping that she would finally explain what was hidden behind her mysterious joy. Koreans, however, were prone to overworking themselves, but, as she reminded him, they lived in Somnium, not Korea. She asked the boy why he continued to overwork himself, and he replied that it was out of a sense of duty. He shrugged, added, Wait a few seconds," and seemed about to do or finish something. The boy, slightly embarrassed, asked the angel, "Is this the kind of dream I have so that I can evaluate myself objectively?" He himself did not know why this particular thought had come to his mind, but it seemed curious and even a little important. He thought about it, as if trying to understand if there was something more to it than just a night vision.